If you're here to mop the floors, the mop and bucket are over there. Officer Ethan Crawley said it loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. A few officers in the back row chuckled. No one objected. Not a single reminder of courtroom decorum. But just minutes later, the woman they thought was a janitor stood up, walked to the witness stand, looked Ethan dead in the eye, and said, "I'm a federal agent, and I'm here to expose you and the entire network of abuse hiding inside the system." Her name was Naomi Rhodes, 39 years old. No name tag, no laptop, just a file bag and a gaze sharp enough to silence the room. Her hair was pulled into a neat bun. A beige blouse flowed past her knees. She walked like she'd been in that courtroom 100 times before. They thought she came to clean. But in truth, she came to begin the largest federal investigation this courthouse had ever seen. Monday morning. Sunlight filtered through the frosted glass panes of Stonebridge Justice Hall, casting long streaks across the worn tile floor, a floor where justice was often blurred by bias and power. Courtroom floor was packed. The air, thick with the scent of varnished wood, old paper, and watered-down coffee, was oppressive but familiar. To the left of the room sat Ethan Crawley, a 44-year-old police officer, slouched in the witness chair with smug indifference. His face bore the expression of a man who considered his presence here a personal insult when a black woman entered quietly, wearing a long beige blouse, her hair in a tight bun, a file bag clutched in one arm. Ethan looked over and laughed out loud. "Hey, if you're here to mop the floors, there's a bucket and a mop right over there," he called out, loud enough for the entire room to hear. A few chuckles rippled through the back row where several uniformed officers sat. One nodded as if to say, "Good one." Judge Trenton Wallace glanced up from his case folder, but said nothing. Not one person objected. Not a single reminder of courtroom decorum. The woman didn't flinch. She simply stopped, turned slowly, and looked directly at Ethan. Her eyes were calm, not angry, not contemptuous, just unerringly steady. Naomi Rhodes, 39 years old, federal agent with the Federal Integrity Division, FID, had arrived. No one in the room knew her name. They assumed she was a court clerk or maybe a cleaning staffer, just another face not worth remembering. And that, precisely, was how she survived here, how the system failed to recognize it was being watched from within. Naomi stepped up to the wooden bench, placed her file bag on the secondary seat, and sat at the spot reserved for witness summoned by prosecution. No one questioned her. No one stopped her. Ethan frowned. Something in him stirred. Something off. Naomi met his gaze, stone-faced. Then, with a measured, composed voice, she turned to clerk. "I'm ready to testify." A few heads turned. Ethan straightened in his chair, annoyed. "Hold on. What the hell is this?" Naomi didn't respond. She tilted her head slightly, as if speaking for every black woman ever dismissed, ignored, or erased in courtrooms across America. Inside her file bag was no mop. It held evidence of a power abuse network that Ethan Crawley had quietly built over nearly a decade. And today, he had opened the door to justice himself, with one filthy joke he thought harmless. Naomi Rhodes remained motionless in the witness chair, unshaken by Ethan Crawley's condescension, as if his insult were a mere gust of stale air. But inside, her heartbeat measured everything. His mocking stare, the wary flicker in Judge Trenton Wallace's eyes. She had trained for this moment for months. On paper, she was Naomi R. Thomas, a temporary resident of South Mason, working as an independent judicial assistant. In truth, she was a senior agent with FID, embedded deep in the system to dismantle one of the most insidious power abuse networks in Illinois. Crawley was just the tip. Naomi was after the base, the names written in invisible ink across transcripts, the backroom handshakes, the bizarre sentencing patterns no one dare question. At the center, Judge Trenton Wallace, respected, measured, but consistently lenient toward corrupt officers and harsh with black defendants deemed not credible. Naomi couldn't operate like a prosecutor. She couldn't subpoena, couldn't question witnesses openly. She had to be a shadow, to sit beside, to listen, to gather, and then expose each mass from within the very place where truth had been silenced. Every morning, She arrived before the courthouse opened, moving past clerks like a fixture of the building. Every afternoon, she left with audio recordings, handwritten notes, and encrypted data stored in a network-less system. She wasn't alone. Across Stonebrook, Carmen Yates, a civil rights attorney with icy eyes and razor memory, was building the legal architecture to support Naomi's findings. And deeper still, Derek Shaw, a former officer under Crawley, had begun feeding information. No audio, no cameras, just words from a man who had once been forced to betray his conscience. Everything had been orchestrated to the rhythm of Naomi's breath. And this morning, Ethan's crude insult wasn't the last straw. It was a starting gun. As the trial entered argument phase, Naomi subtly touched the pen clipped at her collar, its tiny embedded mic now live. She whispered a sentence barely audible. "Fed. Target in position. Operation has commenced." Outside, in the cool early spring sun of Stonebrook, no one realized a covert investigation had just stepped into daylight. Not by search warrant, not by a gun, but with an unwavering gaze and a plan stitched together, stitch by silent stitch. A few hours after the court adjourned for lunch, Naomi Rhodes exited Stonebrook Justice Hall through the South Service door, the one used by custodial staff to avoid media cameras. She moved swiftly through the parking lot, quietly touching the small pendant around her neck. A data stream activated from within. The mini recording device embedded in the pen she'd worn all morning began syncing automatically. No cords, no auxiliary device. Everything uploaded directly to a secure encrypted vault belonging to the Federal Integrity Division, a digital space accessible only by 3 people in the state. The first recording Naomi sent wasn't a bombshell, but it was the first loose stone in a crumbling dam. She really looked like a janitor. Those girls never have college degrees. Ethan Crawley, 8:54 a.m., courtroom 4. The comment had been made just as Naomi entered. It needed no exaggeration, only precision. Simultaneously, her sister began filtering racially biased language and contemptuous inflections from Crawley's past hearings. Bits Naomi had secretly recorded during mic check moments over the last 2 months. Another clip, far more telling. Wallace can rule however he wants. I'll make sure those records disappear in 48 hours. If this crap makes it to press, the whole damn system's retiring early. Naomi hadn't recorded that one. It came from Derek Shaw, from a post-shift bar conversation he'd once endured next to Crawley. Derek had memorized every word and encrypted them through a voice-to-text app on an offline laptop. But what truly made Naomi pause was a video snippet from the courthouse security break room, footage quietly passed along by a gate security officer who'd become an accidental witness. The file had been labeled "Sample Clip for Light Calibration Tests." In the video, Ethan was lounging with his feet on a table, laughing and explaining to 2 rookie officers how to adjust paperwork so confiscated assets could be funneled into internal accounts. Just list the funds as traffic infrastructure renewal support. Nobody checks that stuff. And don't dump too much in one go. Break it up. Disperse. Jurors hate math. Naomi paused the frame. Then, silently, she scribbled in her notebook. Ignorance isn't what builds this mindset. It's winning too many times without ever being asked why. That afternoon, she returned to the courtroom. No one knew that every word Crawley had said, every chuckle from Wallace, every vague reference to necessary order had already been archived, not by memory, but by cold, unforgiving circuitry. Naomi didn't need to confront them head-on. She only needed to listen and let them draw the blueprint of their own downfall. In a world where power assumes no one is watching, it is silence that shakes the very foundation. After the break room video was encrypted and uploaded to the Federal Integrity Division's secure server, Naomi Rhodes knew one thing. She couldn't take this further alone. And just then, 2 names from the past resurfaced, as if history itself were finding a way back to the table. That afternoon, she received a message from an anonymous burner number. "I know who you are, and I know what you're doing. Meet me tonight, 2115, level 3 parking, Old Miller Market." Naomi didn't respond. Instead, she redirected her dashcam feed, embedded a reactive tracking device into the heel of her boot, and drove to the meeting point. When she stepped out, the man waiting was turned away, but she recognized the silhouette instantly. Derek Shaw, a former officer under Crawley, once hailed as a by-the-book protector, until he was framed in a falsified incident and forced into early retirement. But Derek hadn't left bitter. He'd left with memory sharp as a map and a hard drive full of unreported internal files. "I don't need my name cleared," Derek said. "I just need to do one thing right." He handed Naomi a small silver storage device. She opened it on an encrypted tablet. Inside, dozens of emails between Crawley and patrol units, suggesting target rationalization, redistribution of confiscation rights, and media exposure profiling prior to raids. And one file stood out: Yates_Trez_2019. Naomi's face tightened. "Carmen Yates," Derek said, brought a case to court. Wallace dismissed it for lack of credible standing. "But I've got the original filing. She deserves to know. Truth doesn't live in authority. It lives in the hands of those brave enough to hold it." The next morning, Naomi arrived at Attorney Yates's office. A small room, white walls, a metal nameplate slightly peeling, but the air inside felt as heavy as forged iron. Carmen Yates, 41, rose from behind her desk, her gaze sharp as steel. "I knew you'd come eventually," Carmen said, without asking for a name. "I don't care who authorized your mission. I just want to know this time, are you willing to go all the way to the bottom?" Naomi pulled out the file Derek had given her. She placed it gently on the desk and opened to the first page, a photo of Ethan Crawley standing beside Trenton Wallace at an internal office party in 2019, holding a glass of red wine, and a plaque titled "Outstanding Ethical Leadership." Carmen let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Ethical leadership? Then let me bring the truth into the next version of this photo." That evening, Naomi, Derek, and Carmen sat in the back room of an abandoned print shop in Grants Alley, a place where signals could be intercepted and every window was covered in foil. They mapped out the full web of power, from Crawley to Wallace, to the tangled threads leading to budget offices and campaign donors tied to Attorney General Elia Hargrove. Naomi looked at the board covered in photos, diagrams, case file numbers, and said just one thing: if they built this network through silence, then we'll break it with every testimony that was never allowed to be heard. This was no longer a covert mission. It had shape, it had allies, and it had a fuse ready to be lit. Tuesday, 9 a.m., Courtroom 4 of Stonebridge Justice Hall was packed, from the gallery to the jury box. Every eye was locked on one person, but it wasn't the defendant, and it wasn't the judge. Naomi Rhodes stepped onto the witness stand in a simple black blazer. No logo, no name tag. Gone was the quiet presence of her first day. Yet there was no arrogance in her stance. She stood upright, her face unreadable. "My name is Naomi Rhodes. I am a federal agent with the Federal Integrity Division, ID number FID 32874. I have been stationed in Stonebridge for the past 7 months to investigate systemic abuse of power within the city's law enforcement and judicial systems." The room fell into stunned silence. A few people blinked in disbelief. A woman dropped her pen. Ethan Crawley froze, his jaw twitching. Judge Trenton Wallace sat upright, his hand clenching the arm of his chair. Naomi nodded toward Carmen Yates, seated at the legal counsel table. Carmen stood, opened a case file, and began laying documents out on the podium. "Your Honor, we request to present a series of evidentiary exhibits regarding misconduct by Officer Ethan Crawley and his questionable associations with Judge Trenton Wallace." She placed the first file on the stand. Internal emails, signed by Crawley, instructing how to categorize high-asset, easily manipulated targets. Next, an 18-month financial record from a community development fund. In truth, a laundering channel for assets seized without legal cause. And then the audio recording. Naomi activated a small device. A voice echoed through the courtroom. "Just pull him in. As long as the press doesn't get wind, Wallace and I will handle the rest." Ethan Crawley, February 3rd, break room recording. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. One juror furrowed their brow, flipping back through personal notes. Another put on their glasses, listening intently. Naomi wasn't finished. She pulled up a money flow chart, projecting from her laptop to the large courtroom screen. Arrows, account numbers, and screenshots of misplaced transfers lit up. In one slide, a photo of Judge Wallace shaking hands with Crawley at a private event. The caption below reading, $22,500, District 12 Redevelopment Fund. No transaction record. Judge Wallace slammed his gavel. Ms. Rhodes, I warn you. Naomi turned to him, gaze unflinching. Your Honor, your warning can be submitted in writing with a signature. As for the evidence, I'll handle that. The room froze. Carmen smiled faintly, her voice like a line from a legal drama. Looks like we finally have a real trial in Stonebrook. Ethan tried to rise, but the force of 2 courtroom officers pinned him back. Naomi stepped down from the stand, saying nothing more. The counteroffensive had begun, not with gunfire, but with a calm voice and a truth that rang like church bells across a city that had forgotten the sound of awakening. Ethan Crawley said nothing as he was handcuffed, but his eyes never left Naomi Rhodes, as if, given enough time, he might still find a way to flip the board. Unfortunately for him, time no longer belonged to him. 2 judicial officers, deployed by the Federal Integrity Division FID, entered the courtroom the moment the final audio clip ended. In their hands, a formal arrest warrant signed by the Chief Inspector of the Illinois Judicial Review Board. Each of their footsteps echoed coldly through the room, like the drumbeat of a funeral march for a power that had long since gone rotten. Ethan thrashed one last time before being led away, but his final shout, I followed the system. I wasn't the only one, only made more heads turn. No one defended him. Not a single officer stood up for him, because every one of them knew he was telling the truth. Less than 24 hours later, Judge Trenton Wallace's name flashed across the local news ticker. Breaking. Wallace suspended from the bench. FID launches formal criminal investigation. Newscasts ran around the clock. All cases presided over by Wallace would be re-examined. Any rulings suspected of bias or wrongful conviction were granted emergency appeals. A special judicial oversight panel was formed to monitor the entire Stonebrook Justice Hall for the next 90 days. Naomi didn't return to the courthouse the next morning. Instead, she sat in a small cafe on Broadway with Derek Shaw and Carmen Yates, the 3 of them watching the news unfold on a wall-mounted television. When the anchor announced the investigation into Wallace and Crawley's personal assets, Carmen set her coffee cup down gently. I guess ethics finally found its way back to the bench. Derek chuckled, but his voice dropped. Question is, how many Ethans are still out there, hiding in plain sight? Naomi didn't respond immediately. She opened her laptop and logged into the FID's private system. Data columns filled the screen. Not just Crawley, not just Wallace. The numbers pointed to another name, Elia Hargrove, the Illinois Attorney General, a man once hailed as a reformer, a man the press called the new breath of justice. Carmen glanced at the screen, then looked at Naomi. You're going after him too, aren't you? Naomi nodded, but this time, her voice no longer belonged to a covert agent. It carried the resolve of someone who had just ignited the most sweeping purge in recent judicial memory. I'm not tearing down the system. I'm just taking off the mask it used to fool us. At the ground floor of Stonebrook Justice Hall, the plaque bearing Trenton Wallace's name was taken down. No ceremony, no public statement, just a single sheet of paper taped to the now empty wall. Justice doesn't need to be engraved. It needs to be proven. Collapse hadn't begun with an earthquake. It began with a woman who stood up and dared to say, enough. 3 days after Wallace's suspension, while the media still buzzed over the reopening of old cases, Naomi Rhodes quietly opened a file that had gone unnoticed for weeks. It was a copy of a state budget report, unremarkable at first glance, scattered minor grants, and one entry titled Judicial Reform Communications Funding, a transfer of $2.4 million to a private company named Harlan Strategic Media Group. What made Naomi pause was a signature under the approval line. Elia Hargrove, the Attorney General of Illinois, the same man who once appeared in campaign videos with the slogan, "We're not fixing justice, we're rebuilding it." She followed the money trail. Harlan didn't receive just one payment. They were the official media contractor for the Local Crime Prevention Initiative, an initiative launched by Hargrove and piloted by Trenton Wallace in Stonebrook. Carmen Yates stared at the chain of transactions and clenched her jaw. They used public funds to paint the system clean and cut a piece right back for the painter. Derek Shaw added, "You noticed the state police retraining program? Hargrove managed it directly, never once published a curriculum." Naomi said nothing. Her fingers tapped the keyboard, activating an encrypted audio file, a recorded call between Ethan Crawley and a mysterious higher-up he had mentioned before. The voice on the other end was deep, smooth, laced with quiet authority. "I don't care who gets prosecuted, as long as the stats back the campaign. Push it to Wallace. And if we need to cover it up, air a good cop segment next week. It all has to look like reform. Fast." Naomi paused the recording. The voice recognition protocol confirmed. Elliot Hargrove. Not long after, something unexpected happened, bringing the truth closer to the public than ever before. A young reporter from the Stonebrook Beacon, Leon Moretti, somehow got her hands on the first portion of the audio. She published an 800-word article titled, "What if the reformer is actually the one writing the script for what needs to be reformed?" The piece spread like wildfire, but what no one expected was that Hargrove himself would be the first to respond. He didn't deny. He didn't deflect. Instead, he sent a direct, encrypted email to Naomi Rhodes, using a government-level secure line. "Let's meet. No lawyers. No cameras. Just two people who know the game and know what it costs to break it." That evening, on the 42nd floor of Winsbury Hotel, in a windowless room overlooking Stonebrook skyline, Naomi stepped inside. Elliot Hargrove was already waiting, navy suit, a glass of scotch in hand, and eyes that didn't blink when she entered. "You want to burn down the system? Fine," he said, voice smooth as forged steel. "But remember, no fire burns without losing control. The question is, can you live with the consequences?" Naomi looked at him, unflinching. "I don't need to burn it down. I just need to pull back the curtain so everyone can see who's been pulling the strings." She left without taking anything, except the pen clipped to her lapel, the same kind of pen that once started Ethan Crawley's downfall. And this time, it had captured the words of the most powerful man in the state admitting, reform was just theater. As for justice, it was never in the script. But today, Naomi was rewriting it from the first line. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Winsbury still smelled faintly of polished mahogany and premium cigars. No cameras, no assistants, just two people seated across from one another beneath the muted glow of a vintage ceiling light. Elliot Hargrove, Attorney General of Illinois, reclined in a leather chair, elbows resting on the armrests, wearing the expression of someone who had won too many campaigns with too little resistance. His face bore the particular confidence of a man used to manipulating the game, not playing it. Across from him, Naomi Rhodes didn't lean back. She sat upright, hands laced on the glass table. A steaming cup of tea sat before her, untouched. "I'll cut to it," Hargrove said, smiling faintly. "You've done what no one else has, taken down a key part of the machine. And because of that, I think you deserve promotion." Naomi said nothing, just tilted her head slightly, waiting. "I can offer you a federal advisory post, higher pay, your own office, and most importantly, influence. In return, you let the Stonebrook case end here. No broader sweep, no deeper digging." Naomi exhaled, not out of surprise, but because she'd heard offers like this her whole life, from men in different suits, all speaking the same language. Stay quiet to stay safe. "You call that a promotion?" she asked, voice as even as a news anchor. "I call it reality," Hargrove replied. "You can fight your whole life and change nothing, or you can step inside and turn the gears from the center." Naomi lowered her gaze briefly, as if considering it, but when she looked up, her eyes cut sharp as a laser. "If you think I did all this just to earn an office plaque with my name etched on it, then you never understood me at all." She pulled a printed statement from her jacket pocket. A fund transfer from Harlan Strategic Media Group to a secret account linked to Hargrove's cousin. I don't need a title. I need light. Hargrove slowly rose from his chair. No smile now. You're playing with fire, Naomi. People like me don't get prosecuted. We restructure. Naomi stood, too. This time, she stepped in just a little closer. Her voice dropped. You're mistaken. I'm not chasing you. I'm just holding up a mirror. If you see flames in it, maybe you're the one already burning. Back at the FID office that night, Naomi opened a file labeled Hargrove Unfiltered. She didn't send it. Not immediately, because some truths need silence first, before they echo loud enough to break the world open. Instead, she composed a one-line email sent to Carmen Yates, Derek Shaw, and Leon Moretti. He showed his face. Move to phase 2. No permission needed. Let the truth speak for itself. She hit send, and as a glow from her laptop screen reflected off Naomi's ice-cold face, anyone watching might finally understand. The negotiation failed, but the war, it had just truly begun. 3 days after the tense meeting at the Winsbury, Naomi Rhodes received an encrypted call from Derek Shaw's designated contact number. But the voice on the other end wasn't Derek's. It was Kenneth Brooks, a former internal intelligence officer who once turned in his badge because he no longer believed the system could fix itself. His voice was raspy and urgent. I've got something. An audio recording. Not like the others. This one's the final blow. Naomi didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and arranged to meet at the basement of the old West Stonebrook Library, where no cell signal could breach the Cold War, reinforced concrete. When they met, Kenneth handed her an old-school recorder, no Bluetooth, no cloud sync, almost as if he knew this recording was too dangerous to live anywhere digital. Naomi put on the headphones, and through a faint static hum, a familiar voice spoke. Call it reform, and they won't ask why there are no results. We don't need to solve the problem. We just need to manage perception. She recognized it immediately, Elliot Hargrove. In the clip, barely 2 minutes long, he continued to describe how to manipulate the media narrative, choreograph ideal arrests, and position replacement judges who'd follow orders relayed through intermediaries. The recording ended with a short, cold laugh. As long as I look like the reformer, hell itself can be marketed as justice. Naomi stood up. She knew this wasn't just evidence. This was a legal chokehold, and a public image collapse from which there would be no return. The next morning, the recording was sent to 3 national news networks and 12 independent journalists, accompanied by a single note. Not a leak, a removal of the mask. The story exploded like wildfire. Millions of plays, thousands of demands for resignation. Within 36 hours, Illinois Attorney General Elliot Hargrove was suspended. The U.S. Department of Justice issued an official indictment for abuse of power, judicial manipulation, and obstruction of public reform efforts. At a brief press conference, the DOJ spokesperson didn't need to say much. They simply played the first 30 seconds of the audio and stood silently. The rest? The public understood. Naomi watched the broadcast from the FID office. She didn't celebrate. She didn't raise her arms in victory. She simply wrote a single line in her mission journal. False power always thinks it's the truth until the truth finds a voice. The final blow didn't come from a gun. It didn't come from a long speech. It was just 2 minutes of honesty at the right time, from the mouth of the very man who once taught others to stay silent. 1 week after the audio brought down Elliot Hargrove, a flood of invitations poured into Naomi Rhodes' office. Exclusive interviews, book deals, civil awards, and even an offer from the federal government to become senior advisor on justice reform. She read them all and turned them all down, not because she didn't understand the value of recognition, but because Naomi knew real change doesn't begin at a podium. It starts in old desks on the ground floor, where there are no cameras, no applause, just people working with other people. So she left the temporary office of the Federal Integrity Division and moved into a small house on the corner of Fletcher and 3rd, once a rundown neighborhood law office. She purchased a building using her savings and officially opened a civil rights center called The Quiet Accord. No advertising, no branding, just a wooden door that opened each morning with a hand-carved inscription. Because truth doesn't need a microphone, only to be heard. Naomi worked alongside Carmen Yates, who left her high-profile litigation to offer free legal guidance to families affected by wrongful convictions. Derek Shaw trained young law students in ethics and professional accountability, and Kenneth Brooks, drawing from his deep well of experience, facilitated community meetings between new police recruits and local residents. Within 3 months, complaints against police in Stonebrook dropped by more than 60%. One by one, officers who had once stayed silent began writing letters of apology, volunteering for retraining sessions, not out of fear, but because for the first time they felt someone was truly listening to both sides. Naomi never gave a public speech, but on a quiet Saturday morning, during a volunteer class on constitutional rights for high school students, a young girl raised her hand and asked, "Why aren't you angry? You have every reason to be." Naomi set the chalk down on the board and smiled gently, because anger only burns, but truth it plants. On the back wall of the quiet court office, someone had painted a simple piece of graffiti, an image of a cracked mirror, reflecting light from the silhouette of a person standing tall. Below it were the words, "No slogans needed, just stand." Naomi's story didn't end with applause. It didn't end with a parade. It ended with steady, ordinary footsteps, sowing new seeds into ground once hardened by deception, so that justice would no longer feel like a distant ideal, but a daily habit. And in the middle of a place once thought broken beyond repair, Naomi Rhodes chose not to tear it all down. She chose to replant in the same old soil, with clean hands and a heart that would not compromise.